Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Out in the little greenhouse, got a fully sunny day. We've had 2 or 3 sunny days in a row. We hit about 35 degrees outside, so I took advantage of that. Yesterday or the day before, I threw a whole bunch of our actual nitrogen pellets on our compost and watered those in with a few buckets of warm water from inside so I could really mix that nitrogen up. And we're pulling some decent results already without even having to mix up our compost there. And I was just kind of in here assessing damages. Kick my pump on here, see if some water comes through the line. Yeah, so our pump is still working. So this is basically all we're flowing through this greenhouse. Our water is absolutely filthy in here, our overflow tank, but this is all we're flowing through this entire system. So we're basically gravity feeding it up to this hose that is wrapped up through the whole compost pile, and then it basically just shoots back out and heads through the floor and then back up the other side to warm all the stones and bricks in here. So obviously it's not working as it's supposed to right now. I was just kind of testing it to see if this bad boy was actually going to work still, because it was frozen in a block of ice. I'm gonna kick that back off. I really just wanted to assess the damages if there was any. The housing on our pump is perfectly fine, so it withstood that freezing solid in a block of ice, which is great for us. And most of our plants that I thought were going to survive really did. So we remember this cilantro. The cilantro was pretty well frozen back, but it is bouncing back very well. We've got our thermal masses back here. These feel physically warm. I don't have my actual gun out here to check the temps, but this cilantro did well, pulled right through that freezing temps we had. And we've even got this marshmallow herb back here. I forgot about this little guy. You can see all those little shoots coming off the base of that marshmallow herb. That's pretty darn cool for just being a forgotten about plant. So I really didn't come out to check on the plants as much as I came out to check on my systems, and I wanted to go over our compost system and go talk about that. So let's head outside. Most of our snow has melted. This little guy's just hanging out. I think it's a girl, actually. We're gonna head over to our compost. So I've already thrown a ton of wood chips on top of this pile. The pile is sitting right around 60, under 60 degrees, probably about 58 degrees down towards in the center of the actual pile itself. And that is all thanks to our urea. So we had taken maybe a quarter to half of this bag and just kind of inoculated it through the whole pile and kind of mixed the top layer up. And this had worked very well for us. This brought the pile from 30 degrees inside up to 60 within a matter of 24 to 36 hours or so. So it's only been a day or two since we've actually inoculated that, and you can see that it started to break the material down. I was having a little bit of steam come out of there. So getting a pile active in the winter is not easy, but having a halfway active compost pile like this is going to really benefit us now that we're going to be able to mix all this material up. I've got a whole bunch of my wood chips, and I've got these nice pressed straw bales. I think this is wheat straw or something like that. So we're going to inoculate all that and mix it up with what we've got in here, and that is going to get us the burn that we need for the rest of the winter. So when we're talking about composting wood chips, you want to have at least like a ton of wood chips. 1 ton, which is about 4 cubic yards or so, and that is going to get you a decent burn if inoculated and soaked properly. Good moisture content to it. And the reason we use wood chips all the time is because of their density. All of the density of these wood chips, these are nice and soaked and wet, and that nitrogen really kicked it. We did a big nitrogen dump with these, and this was a quick, fast releasing nitrogen source here, kind of like a bucket of urine. And that is what me and my kids have been doing, is basically saving a bucket of urine for the last 2 days since I inoculated this pile. We just threw a bucket of urine out back, and it kind of froze up last night, but me and the kids have been trying to fill it up as quick as we can. And it sounds kind of gross, but all of the urea is basically supercharged. It's all that urea is going to really activate that pile. I took one of my leaf bags and I had broken it up. We had a leaf bag over the top of this insulating it, so I took one of those bags and broke it up and mixed it down in deeper in the pile, because with this pile I'll basically basically dig this out, try and get out of the sunlight here. So I'll dig this whole pile out and create like a 2-foot hole as big as I possibly can, and just go straight down and heap everything to the outside, and then I can create a nice burning core that goes right down in the middle of all of my hoses there. So I thought for sure that this urea was going to kickstart this pile even warmer than it has, and it's only about 60 degrees. It was at 60 and it's coming up there. It was kind of bouncing back and forth between 60 and like 58. Now all of these straw bales that I got, they're really dry, so I'm gonna have to get these very soaking wet, and basically I'm going to use one of these bales for insulation. I'm going to break it apart and give a nice good 6 to 8 inch layer on top of all of these wood chips for a good insulation layer, nice insulation factor. So I'm going to kind of rip this apart and re-inoculate this pile and basically rebuild it here. So that was a bit of work. We can see way down in there, get way down in there. I got steam coming up around it. Most of the steam has basically rolled off by now, but this is about the best way that I can get this going right now without having to re-scoop and move all 3 cubic yards of this. And I should have about 3 or 4 cubic yards by the time I'm done here. We can see a pretty good breakdown of materials, and this is pretty deep. This is probably like a 3-foot hole, and all of this material is kind of hanging over the sides. This hole is actually bigger than it looks here, but basically we're going to dump a nice mixture of greens, browns, fresh wood chips, and a bunch of our straw here, which is going to act as our greens and soak up all of that urine. We're going to throw our urine bucket in, basically inoculate all of this, and then we're going to throw some extra nitrogen from this actual urea bag. So we've got a good nitrogen source. We've got all the browns we need. We've got a couple leaf bags left for insulating this wall here, and then like I said, we're going to cap it and split one of these bales up to basically form a nice layer on top of this. So I'm going to go ahead and do the work and basically just fill this up with layers of brown green, and then I'm going to inoculate it. And when I'm saying green, I mean this actually dry brown straw. So technically I'm using a ton of browns, but a nice lighter medium of brown to get a quicker burn. Those wood chips kind of take a little bit to get ignited and get rolling sometimes. I'm pretty sure I covered everything that I'm going to be doing to this and doing with this pile. I basically dug the hole out, and I can feel the heat coming off of the center of that hole. So we did have some decent heat way deep down in there where all of the nitrogen had sank down. So I'm sure we'll get a decent burn with this. The weather kind of helped us out. So I'll throw all this together, and hopefully I can get this pile cooking with all of these materials here, a little bit of extra chicken poo from those guys, and I should have enough nitrogen without having actual green material that all of the nitrogen should react with it well, and I should be able to have a decently warm compost pile within another few days here. Instead of breaking it up into 2 videos, I'm just going to kind of cut here, and then we'll come back in a few days and we're going to check this pile out. So we're going to go head out and check our compost here. Just stuck my compost thermometer, got a bit of snow. All the compost had basically melted all the snow. It's pretty well just slush now. Sitting, what does it say, about 120 degrees. So this is about 3-4 days. It's probably day 4 after I actually rebuilt this. I just used a whole bunch of our straw bedding on top, all of this hay bale, and all this stuff to basically insulate that up the best I possibly could. It's freezing out here. We're only sitting about 20 degrees out here right now. It's not that bad if the sun's out, but it's pretty chilly out there. Definitely a lot warmer in here. And I apologize, I don't have my actual gun thermometer where I can take a temp. So I wanted to get my coat off and check this out. I ended up smashing my little compost tube, so I'm still blowing air through there, and it's definitely warm air. Not sure how warm, but it feels like it's good 70 or 80 degrees blowing out of that, and that is on the outer side of our compost, basically up against this wall here, just transferring whatever heat it can. And yeah, the timer is on. I'm gonna kick that on. I never ended up changing out this water here, so it is filthy, but I wanted to show what we've got going on there. So our water travels up through that tube all the way through the compost and then dumps back in Definitely feels warmer than the water that's in there, so it's probably about 60 degrees. I've got everything running and it's kind of jankily put together right there. That little dryer vent is definitely getting crushed back. No matter what I did, that mass behind it is pretty darn solid. I got a bunch of leaves packed down on it, so I'm basically just gonna leave that, maybe put a piece of PVC. I got an elbow I can stick to kind of get into the tube so it's blowing more air directed into the greenhouse as opposed to going up into the compost there. So in the first part of this, you got to see me basically tear a hole out of the dead center of that compost and basically take everything from the inside and just pull it out on the outside and refill it with a whole bunch of material, mostly brown material, but we added a whole bunch of liquid nitrogen and little nitrogen pellets. So we basically infused all that, and it all is burning pretty hot out there. And the temperature hasn't been cooperating since the day we built it. We've had pretty low temperatures at night, and that led to a slower build of this. We had a lot of wood chips in there, and those wood chips always seem to take forever to start cooking compared to a normal compost. We're used to a pile heating up in 24 to 36, 48 hours at the most, so within 2 days your pile should be pretty well active in the summertime. But in the winter time, with that larger, denser material of wood chips and inoculating all that, we use all of our grass and straw bale out there to basically mix with the wood chips and the chicken poo that we put in there and all of our urine and those nitrogen pellets, and we basically layered all of that like a lasagna layer, where we just basically put everything in, and then I took my pitchfork and stirred everything up without poking a hole in my actual hose here, my little rubber hose running through the compost. But as you can see, I did crush my air tube, so having a solid air tube, I guess I've been running with just a dryer vent for 3 or 4 or 5 years now. So normally in winter time, it's very hard to get a compost pile going unless you have a massive amount where it overcomes those outside temps and basically shells itself in. We like to use a rule of thumb of either 75 to 80% carbon to 25 to 20% nitrogen, give or take, because all of our wood chips are usually pretty fresh. They come with a bit of nitrogen in them that is ready to be composted by themselves without any addition of any more nitrogen or water or anything. Now this compost is outside my greenhouse, but it's very close to my greenhouse, so I wanted to make a point to say that compost does draw mice and rodents and voles and stuff, and they will thrive all winter in your warm compost if you've got it warm enough. So we have had a few issues in this little greenhouse, not so much in our large greenhouse, but down here I notice a few holes here and there, and we try and set traps, but most of them are pretty crafty and they do not get caught in the traps. So trying to keep my compost farthest away from the greenhouse as possible. Down in the large greenhouse, our compost is probably 3-4 feet at the most away from our greenhouse. That really made a difference for us. Plus the fact we weren't composting inside the greenhouse. That's why I don't compost in here. One thing, we don't have enough space, but I don't want to draw those critters. After I experimented with it in the large greenhouse, I will never put compost inside my greenhouse again unless it's in like a rotating bin like you see, or some type of compost container where the mice cannot access it, but they will still be drawn to it and drawn to all of your crops and stuff like that. We ended up replacing a whole bunch of crops from the cold weather. We got a bunch of pak choy or tatsoi or something and a bunch of kales planted in there, just trying to refill the actual bed here from what we lost in that Arctic blast. We suffered a major loss in this greenhouse. Some of the stuff here is still alive. We've got some of our lettuces and stuff. There's a few dead leaves on the dirt there, but for the most part these turnips survived very well, and all of this lettuce, we've got good harvestable leaves there. This kale down here really pulled through for us. It is looking pretty darn healthy, so that's actually pretty exciting. Our cilantro, we cut it all back and it started regrowing. So on my mission to basically recreate Jean Pain's heating, I started in this little tiny greenhouse with a very small setup. This is a very minimalistic system, but it had enough heat to heat the floor and warm the floor up enough and warm all the bricks that I walk on, and basically keep these temps above freezing all winter long. And that is a pretty big feat when all we've got is all of this bubble wrap for insulation and a whole bunch of leaf bags or straw. I've learned a lot about compost, and compost heat capture regardless of what material you're using. There's a lot of methods for composting, a lot of different materials, and I've been studying this for quite some time. A lot of buildings just are designated for capturing the heat that rises off the compost as they turn it, or a system like ours where we're just composting and pulling the heat off through small devices and hose or whatever kind of tubing. So this compost back here, being 3 cubic yards or so, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little more, produces about 1,660 BTUs per cubic yard of compost per hour, relating that to being between 4,000 and 5,000 BTUs that potentially could be put off of that active compost per hour coming into this greenhouse. Now our large greenhouse has 14 cubic yards of compost or wood chips active, and that would be 3-4 tons. Would be putting out between 21 and 25,000 BTUs per hour is, I think, what we documented that at. So that's a lot of heat. That is a lot. 25,000 BTU per hour being put into the greenhouse. That's how we survived that Arctic blast, and that's why I'm still Jean Pain heating this little tiny greenhouse, because it worked. Now this is just a little hoop house, and I always state that they're very hard to insulate, but let's say that this size greenhouse, the same size, was a well insulated bedroom. It would only require 1,560 or 70 BTUs to keep it maintain the airspace of 60 to 70 degrees. So that really puts in perspective of how much we're putting in here and how much it requires to keep heat coming and to continually heat. When the outside's just trying to sap all of the heat out of the greenhouse, you're constantly having to rewarm it. Now this isn't a well insulated greenhouse, it's insulated well. I have a bunch of bubble wrap up, which works very well, and they're all just kind of layered, and they have like a gap in between, so it's almost like a double layer poly. And the more insulation you put on your northern wall, the higher up you can go, the better. We basically went up like chest high with all of our leaf bag. That meets our requirements for insulating this back wall, and we've got good insulation value on that wall. This wall does not have so much insulation value. Our leaf bags only come up and they're laid out, so we got 1 foot high, and then everything else is basically just exposed. All of the plastic, like our door is double layered, our windows are double layered. That's not much still. Even in the winter time it gets very cold if we do not have a good system running. If we don't have our Jean Pain heater running, or we don't have any sun during the day, these bricks do not warm up and we will be dead in the water. That's what happened during that Arctic blast on us. But the roughly 5,000 BTU we're putting into this greenhouse per hour potentially is enough to maintain 40 degrees overnight and continue with this cycle. This little battery operated system, which has a timer, continues that flow and allows the water to come in, and it maintains that good steady temperature on the floor because it never really sinks too low. It always gets reheated back up 15 minutes of every hour all night long. This was just the most simplistic method I could come up with to operate this system, and it's just basic. So if you look down to our large greenhouse, we have a whole lot more going on and a lot more complicated system with our Jean Pain heating, and it is much larger and producing a lot more heat. Like I said, 20 to 25,000 BTUs per hour coming into that large greenhouse. Before this video gets any longer, I'm going to end it here. I'm basically going to do a comparison on my Jean Pain heating to my stove heating, the BTU output potentials, and what I'm going to do going forward with those systems, and if there's one that's better than the other. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching this, and thank you to all my subscribers. You guys are awesome. If you guys have any feedback on this little greenhouse or any more questions, I kind of jumped around when I was building that pile because it was pretty labor intensive, and I got pretty darn dirty trying to make sure I didn't poke any of my hoses, and I completely forgot about crushing my tube, so when I came back in here that was crushed. So we're just going to ride with that for the rest of the winter here till I can get some type of solid piece of metal that I'll just basically plumb, and that will be a permanent fixture right there as a winter compost heating tube. And I'm sure I'll be able to use it somehow in the summertime. If I put wood chips up on it, I can use it like a thermal cooling device and just blow that cool air from underneath the wood chips. Just gave myself an idea there. So I really appreciate you guys watching these videos and all of the feedback I get. Please keep it up.